So the Mercosur trade deal was just approved after 25 years of negotiations, and now the European Commission president will sign it in Paraguay, and it went through. Despite opposition by big countries like France and Poland, it finally went through after Italy switched to their side. And why this is so important and why I'm making a video about this is, of course, how large the trade deal is. It unlocks a market of like 270 million people for European exporters. So it will be much easier now for European companies to export to South America. And vice versa, of course, it will be easier for South America to access European markets. But to quickly just show you the biggest goods in this trade deal, you can see here on the left side removed tariffs for EU exports. So exports going from the EU to Mercosur in South America. So European cars, industrial equipment, and a bunch of agricultural products will have removed tariffs. And you see here, cars that will be great for the German auto industry that has struggled for the past years, and industrial equipment, a lot of agricultural products, a lot of big European exports. And on the other hand, these South American countries it will be easier for them to export, among other things. This is not a complete list, but critical raw materials to Europe, and also their own agricultural exports to Europe. There, among them, beef, which has been one of the more controversial things about this deal, because European farmers have had concerns about getting more competition from less safe beef from overseas. But I think those concerns are quite overblown, and I will get into that soon as well. But if you're just looking at some examples, this is from the website of European Council. So this is specifically, removing tariffs on EU agri-food exports. So, for example, olive oil. We exported 600 million of olive oil to the Mercosur countries in 2024. And right now the tariff is at 10%. But with this trade deal, that tariff will be removed. So a lot of these, olive oil, wine, chocolate, cheese, a lot of these big European exports will now be met with zero tariffs. And so Europe can now much more profitably export to South America, and this will boost these export industries and the European economy. And we also have, here we have this is also from the council website, addressing the criticism of Mercosur beef, competing with EU beef and being less safe. But and I also took these concerns quite seriously when I first heard about them, because I'm a European. I don't want our safety standards to be undermined by lower quality meat that doesn't meet our safety standards. But as far as I've read, it seems like this deal doesn't undermine the standards. The exports from South America has to meet the standards of the European health standards. And as far as competition, we also want Europe to be self-sustainable. We want our own farmers. This deal also doesn't really actually threaten European beef production, and that is because this lower tariff is only for a certain quota of beef, so 99,000 tons. So they can, at this lower duty, they can export 99,000 tons. But then after those 99,000, the duty goes up again to the high tariff. And 99,000 tons, that sounds a lot, but that is just 0.6% of all MERCOSUR beef production. So in reality, they can only export a little bit of beef at this lower tariff. Then they go back to a higher tariff. And so, in reality, this will not really be a big threat to European beef production. But, it is still, going to be easier to export some beef. So I'm not saying it's not going to have an impact, but I think it has been kind of overstated. And if you look at France, for example, France, why they voted against this deal is because they have such a strong, farmers lobby, and they had a concern about this, and that's why France didn't vote for this agreement. But the reasons why many other countries, also with many farmers with a lot of influence, voted for it is because of all the compromises. Like, for example, this quota was a compromise, and the EU has also promised more money for the EU budget towards farmers and so. So there's been a lot of negotiation, and that's partly why this deal has taken such a long time, because there's been a concern about protecting European farmers. Going from farm products, as I talked about, critical materials, raw materials. So all these materials will be tariff-free. So South American countries can export these easier to Europe, and we Europeans will be able to buy them more cheaply and get better access to these products, which are important for our industries. Okay, so that's the MERCOSUR trade deal. But it's a very big deal. There was a lot of things I didn't touch on, and I've read up about it, but I don't claim to be an expert. But now I'm going to give you my big picture answer to why I think it's such an important deal. Of course, it's very important economically. More exports can boost the EU economy. Certainly for countries like Germany, whose auto industry is struggling, getting access to the big South American market and being able to export European cars to a whole, not a whole continent, but to the biggest countries on that continent, could be a boost for the economy. But also, it's very, I would say, strategically important. And what I mean by that is that, in recent times, Trump has become president again for the United States. And, of course, the United States is the biggest partner for Europe, our ally. And, that's where we have, traditionally, historically exported our products. But, with Trump's, trade wars and, raised tariffs against European countries, it's become harder and harder to export to the US. And even though there now is a trade deal between the US and the EU, Trump is very unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen. And you can't really be sure that this trade deal will last and that the relationship with the US will be so favorable for Europe anymore. So that's why opening up new channels and making it easier to also export goods to South America is very much in the interest of the EU. Simultaneously, economically, but also, becoming more independent from the US. I'm not saying, go not exporting to the US anymore and going to South America. The US is the biggest economy. You can't substitute that, but you can lessen the hurt by also strengthening your trade connections with other areas of the world. In that way, Europe will have more leverage in a future trade war, because if we can't export cars to the US anymore, then we have access to the MERCOSUR markets to export cars to, even though, of course, the MERCOSUR countries may not, have as much, money to spend as the US. But of course, MERCOSUR is not the only trade deal we can do. If Europe also can get trade deals done with, like, for example, India, then we have even more options, and we can make sure that we are not as independent of the US anymore as we once was. And also not only the US, of course, but we also have to take into consideration China, which, in this world, it seems like, the US and China are the two superpowers. And if Europe wants to become one of them, a world superpower, or, if Europe wants to become a superpower and not, mushed in between, then we need to strengthen our connections with the rest of the world. We need to have, trade agreements as this one, MERCOSUR, and especially, in South America, not only the US, with the Monroe Doctrine, called them what's called Monroe Doctrine, but then also China has been making, steps to increasing their influence in South America, and so this could be, Europe's way to strengthen our relationships with the South American countries and making sure that the European voice, has an actual say and that it matters, because we do have these connections with other countries. Now, that's just my view of the situation, that in this new, might makes right world, it is important to not be as dependent on the US when the US, evidently doesn't really care about what its allies want anymore. It's just what's best for the US. Not even that really. It's just very short-term thinking from the US administration right now, and then it's important for Europe to explore other avenues. Yes, I've rambled on for longer than I thought. I thought I could make this video much more concise and not as monotone, but that's what it is.